of what exactly she was saying, but she talked about it, and I went up to her afterwards, and I had always heard that Martha was someone I should know, and she, vice versa, had sort of, people had said, you two are a good pair. And so I went up to her and I said, I've got all this training. I would love to put it to work for you. Like, I, use what WashU has given me, which is terrific, and I'm happy to use it for them, but let me use it for help you get going. And so I started earliest on helping to write the first grants that Four Way put together. And then as I was doing that, at some point, Martha sent me one of our early books and said, this is forthcoming. Do you want to take a hand at editing it? And so I did that. And then everything just kind of slowly snowballed from there. But it was pretty funny. I mean, I was working from St. Louis at first and then Arizona, and this was before PDFs. So when we very first started, we were FedExing the galleys of books back and forth. And I was the sort of, I at some point I became the managing editor, and I was doing that from afar. And so the typesetter would FedEx me the typeset book, and I would go through it and make notes, and then I would FedEx it to the author. They would FedEx it back to me. I would FedEx it to the typesetter, and we would go back and forth 3 or 4 times on every book. Our bills were enormous. So the internet was, a boon for the press. And my work there has really been doing grant stuff, working on copy editing, which is strangely a joy. I have enough of a grammarian bone that I can see it and query it, and I can be pretty sort of school-marmy about certain things. But also, I'm a poet, and I get it when people are doing something a little bit different, or when they have there are times when I'm reading something and I start querying a certain usage, and then it keeps on happening over and over, and I'm like, no, this is definitely on purpose, and more power to you. But I always ask, just in case it's not on purpose. But anyway, I enjoy this work, and I think people like the mix I can bring to their book of both a kind of correctness knowledge, but also openness to innovation and particularity. And then I also, starting in, I think, 2007 or so, I started to acquire books and then work really closely with writers as an editor on books before they get to the point of production. And I mean, that is, I think, the most, I don't know, that's the most, as work that you sit down to do, that's the most fun of the 3 things that I do, I guess. But I also, Four Way passed its 25th anniversary last year. I've been part of things for 23 of 26 years now, I think. And I feel really proud. Like, when I look back at my life, I think, like, wow, I really helped make this thing what it is. Yeah. And that's been so good for so many writers. And so that's really satisfying.
What does the selection process look like for Four Way? Do you do a sort of open submissions, or do you solicit material, or
it's a little bit of everything?
Of both? Yeah. Okay.
We've been doing fiction for the last 5 or 6 years more seriously, and we have an annual contest for books of poems that takes manuscripts in the spring. We have open reading in June, takes both kinds of manuscripts, fiction and poetry. And then we have a within the 5 boroughs of New York only reading period in December that just keeps us a part of our home community. So those are in fact the best ways to get your book taken by Four Way, because we have to keep spots for that. Gotcha. And as the press has grown, we're doing 15, 16 books a year. We have a lot of returning authors, and it's always been our goal that, when you're a Four Way author, we're going to stick with you, and we're going to help you build that career. And so we want people to come back, and that's why we've grown, because you can't publish the growing backlist and keep on supporting new emerging voices, right, which we also want to do, unless you grow. And so, when I started, it was 2 or 3 books a year. Then for a long time, it was 6 to 8. Then it was 12. Now all of a sudden it's 15, 16. Like, we've really, really had to expand. which is exciting. And we do take books that come other ways. I mean, returning authors are a big source. The contests and open reading are a big source. We sometimes will solicit or have a book that's recommended. I mean, that happens. But the three of us, Martha Rhodes, Ryan Murphy, and I, who do most of the editorial selections, have been telling people, like, it is not a good idea to try to go around the back door and come to us personally, because we don't have a guaranteed spot for a book that Sally happens to like. You know, what we have is a guaranteed spot times 1, 2, 3 for books from the June reading.
Gotcha.
So that, I mean, that's sort of, you know, there's all kinds of ways, but
well, and how do you manage that like capacity wise, and being able to give the attention to each book that you publish when you're publishing 15 titles a year?
Well, I discovered about myself that I am not an efficient or especially visionary reader of the slush pile, right? So I don't do that anymore, hardly ever. I mean, never. I never do that anymore. And so my energy is not sort of drained by having to be alert to what's happening in the submission pool. We have writers, all with MFAs, most with books, who do screen for us. Okay. And we change the screens regularly so that you can submit to us one year and not get through, and then you can come back the next year and knowing that it's a different set of eyes that will see your book. And in fact, even if we have somebody screening for a second time, we know what books we assigned them, and we don't give them the same books again. So there's always a rotation, which is good for people, you know, who want to maintain hope that you know the right reader is still potentially out there. In terms of my life, which is very full because I'm teaching and I'm doing this, I really have to be careful about not overcommitting in any of the worlds. But you know, I've been working this year closely on books by Ariel Greenberg and Ed Pavlich, Enrique Berto Gonzalez, and Kevin Proofer. And that's more than most years. I don't usually have 4 titles that are kind of under my umbrella
really full plate.
At once.
Yeah.
That's been a lot. Although the Ariel book, she and I have been going back and forth for a couple of years now, and it's been such a satisfying correspondence that I definitely wouldn't trade it. And I'm happy that she's not mad that it sometimes moves very slowly. But we're zooming into overdrive now because her book will be out, I think, a year from this fall. And so we're getting to the point of production at this stage.
Well, and how that's another, because one of the things is that right now it's still just 2 of us, and for us it's too much work at this point. We're looking to try to incorporate, I don't know, possibly through internships or something, to try to get some readers in and to try to streamline things a little bit, just because there's just too much work with everything. But from what we haven't figured out yet is what is a good and what is a standard or acceptable timeline for that process from acceptance of a manuscript to production.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the very fastest that anybody does it is 1 year.
Okay.
And one reason is that if you're working with a distributor, and or if you're trying to get pre-pub reviews in Publishers Weekly or Library Journal or Kirkus, you have to have those books ready to go out at least 6 months, and probably more than 6 months in advance. And so, and also if you're seeking grant funding, you're applying more than a year in advance. So, our list is planned. I think we're probably full, definitely through 2020, probably through 2021 and into 22 at this point. And I think, there are still contests that turn around quickly, and our contests turn around in a year's time. Like if you win in 2019, your book will be out in 2020. Okay. But I feel like when I look around the publishing world, it's only contests that are going that fast for the most part. And it's a risk to go that fast because it's really hard to get all those other pieces
Yeah.
lined up to support the book. And, Michael Wiegers, who runs Copper Canyon Press, has this great phrase that he uses when he talks about publishing, which is that it's publishing for a reason. It's public. You're making that book go out into the public's hands. It's not privishing. It's
Right.
not, this tiny little thing that you're going to give to your 4 friends and your grandparents are going to buy. The idea is to make something that's really valuable available to a wide audience, as
Right.
wide as possible. And that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it does. I think that that basically, once we get through this current publication cycle, it's something that we're going to have to pull back on our turnaround rate, just because it's not. I mean, especially when we just got the 2 of us working on it right now, it's kind of insane, and it's not fair. On the one hand, one of the reasons that we were trying to do things on a little bit of a quicker time frame is because when we would accept something, it seems like the authors get very impatient. The writers get very impatient. And but at some point, there's just got to be the pushback of, look, this is the model, this is the business. You've got like 2 years. So,
yeah. No, and I mean, one argument is it's more professional.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's tricky. If the argument is we're just 2 guys and we don't have time, that's not so exciting, right? That seems like a problem. But once, as those ratios change, right? And as the organization professionalizes, you're going to want to be getting grants. You're going to, unless you're staying for profit or something, but you're going to want to have the book in galleys so that you can send it out to places and get some buzz going before and things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve. Again, it almost ends up being like the podcasting thing, where I've just figured it out as I go.
Yeah.
But it's definitely. I mean, how have you seen the landscape of this kind of change, especially over the last 5 to 10 years? The whole model has very much been influenced by technology too. So, and what for a while, I worked in a bookstore for a long time, and there was always the chatter in the background of bookstores are going to go the way of Tower Records, and and then when Borders went out, then that was it's soon going to be the end of all of that, and then despite that, it seems that that books continue to survive in a different way. So I'm just from your experience with that, how did you see that kind of evolve, and how did you guys react to that? Was there a lot that you had to change over this time period?
We were a pretty early adopter of print on demand, which has only gotten better. I mean, there was a stretch of time where you might get a book that looked a little too dot matrixy or something,
sure.
right? That the quality wasn't very nice. But it's now, the digital processes are good enough that you can print in amounts that you want at the times that you need, and it's efficient and valuable to do that. And most of the presses that I know well enough to know what's going on have also gone that way. There's a much less offset printing than there used to be. The thing that I go back to is actually older, and that was really clear and dramatic to me. And that is, Four-Way was founded in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And a lot of smaller presses focused on poetry came into being in that sort of decade window around us. And I think it was because New York had, all the independent major New York houses had been bought by corporations like Viacom, right?
Yeah.
And therefore they were answerable to shareholders in ways that they hadn't used to be. And so in the old days, publishing was this gentleman's business, and you could publish, a best-selling thriller writer and choose to use that money to invest in literary titles, and presses would compete for cachet because they would have the money coming in from, Scott Turow, and then they would also be publishing John Ashbery, and it would, they that's two wins, right? They
Right,
have
'cause you have your
the prestige
prestige,
author,
yeah,
and you have
yeah.
the moneymaker.
Sure.
But once